Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for the story of race, racial literacy as a tool for social justice. I'm Lena Nahlus, I'm the CEO of Diversity Arts Australia, the national voice for ethnocultural and migrant racial equity in the arts and creative sectors. And we're really proud to partner with GARUWA and Shifting Ground on this project. This is the second talk in the Imagine First Nations Case Study series, a project led by Dr. Genevieve Greaves and Dr. Lilly Brown through GARUWA and Shifting Ground in partnership with Diversity Arts and with funding from Creative Australia. The 13 Imagine case studies document and amplify the work of First Nations artists and cultural workers who are reshaping the creative sector through decolonial and anti-racist practice. They're powerful, generous examples of what it means to record, share and centre First Nations knowledge, and to build critical community-led frameworks that challenge the colonial and racial hierarchies still embedded in our institutions and industry. Today's talk discusses the global backlash against anti-racism and decolonial work, against the very act of naming racism and colonial power. Today's talk is about how the systems we live and work within still don't reflect or support all of us, and how they're structured to exclude and to silence. Yet, as First Nations people have shown for over 2 centuries, creativity and culture is still resistance. It's how we imagine new futures beyond the present and how we keep our cultures, voices and truths alive. And this is why racial literacy is so critical. It teaches us to see and name injustice and culture, and this is why racial literacy, we know, is so critical, because it teaches us to name injustice, and culture and creativity give us the tools to change it. At Diversity Arts, we focus on anti-racism, and we have projects like Anti-Racism in the Arts and the Creative Equity Toolkit. And we also do a lot of training through Fair Play and another training initiative that we've been developing. And while our focus is on ethnocultural and migrant communities, we work in partnership with First Nations-led organisations like GARUWA and Shifting Ground, because particularly as settler migrants on this land, we can't talk about race in this country without grounding it in the First Nations history of dispossession and colonisation. So now let me introduce Dr. Lilly Brown, who will facilitate today's conversation and has run a lot of training for us at Diversity Arts, and who I highly recommend. Dr. Lilly Brown is a scholar, facilitator, educator and director. As a founder of Shifting Ground and CEO of the First Nations publishing house, Magabala Books, Lilly advocates for the self-determination of First Nations people, including supporting arts organisations to develop practices of cultural safety, racial literacy and sustainable governance to centre the critical knowledge and lived experience First Nations people bring to the table. Dr. Lilly Brown and Dr. Genevieve Greaves developed Shifting Ground as an Aboriginal-owned and women-led enterprise that supports organisations and individuals from diverse communities, including First Nations peoples, to foster meaningful conversations that connect people's lived experience with the broader systems that shape them. And if you don't mind me giving you a plug, I highly recommend Shifting Ground and GARUWA as organisations that you really want to work with in the future. Thank you again for being here for this really important conversation. And I'll hand over now to Dr. Lilly Brown to open with an acknowledgement of country and to introduce our awesome speakers.
Guinea, thank you so much, Lena, and thank you to the team at Diversity of Arts for having Odette, Dianne and myself on today. We really appreciate you spending your lunch break with us. Before beginning, I'd like to acknowledge the place that I now call home, a town on the lands of the Yari and Juukan people, a place called Ribibi, which is the Yari place name for Broome in the north of Western Australia. If any of you have had the opportunity to visit this place, where the Pindan or red dirt meets the bluest sea, you would know how incredibly inspiring Yari and Juukan country is. I have deep gratitude to Ribibi, not only as the place I now call home, but also as the ancestral country of my children and partner, and therefore as the nourisher of thousands of generations of my kin. I also acknowledge all of the First Nations that each of you are calling in from. If I can actually get you to pop in the chat where you are located, on whose unceded lands you are based, that would be really great, just so we can get a sense of where people are calling in from. So just put that in the Zoom chat now. And then if you're unsure, I really encourage you to find out whose unceded lands nourish you. So we've got Gadigal and Bidjigal, Wamba Wamba, and Parapa Parapa, Bunurong, Wurundjeri. All Wurundjeri represents, like always. We've got some people on Wajak Puja, Wadarang, Kabi Kabi, some Queensland representation, Nipaluna. Thank you all from hailing from all corners of the continent to join us today. And while I would usually be joining you from Rabibi, today I'm actually 2,000 kilometers north of home in Bali, Indonesia. The background that you can see behind me is real. And so I acknowledge the relationship too between the people of Indonesia and the northern coast of so-called Australia, a relationship that has existed between First Nations people and Indonesian people, and particularly Makassar people, relationships shared by trade routes and language, relationships that have actually existed for centuries before white European settler invaders came to the shores of Australia. And these relationships still exist, and I can attest to that, especially in Broome, in Rabibi, where those relationships are intergenerational. And even for my son, whose name is Sulong, they're intergenerational and they're kin related. So as always, I also send my love and solidarity across the ocean to Gaza and the occupied territories, and to our Palestinian siblings, some of whom are indeed on this call. As Lena has said, I am Dr. Lilly Brown. I'm a Gumbaynggirr woman from the mid-north coast of New South Wales. I spent my early years on Whadjuk Noongar country, on Dianne's country, followed by over a decade on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong or Bunurong people, where I met the two panel speakers for today, Dianne and Odette, before returning to the homelands of my partner and kids in Rabibi. I wear many hats, as Lena said, one of those being the CEO of the award-winning Aboriginal community-controlled publishing house, Muggabala Books. If you don't know it, look it up, it's incredible. And another hat as the co-founder and director of Shifting Ground with my big sis, Genevieve Greaves. I'm so pleased to be holding space for this conversation today. It's a conversation that between Dianne, Odette, and myself has been going for 15 years. And it's around the story of race, using racial literacy as a tool for social justice. Before introducing Dianne and Odette, I want to thank you all again so much for turning up today. We really appreciate your presence. It animates us, it gives us energy. What we hope to do today is to introduce you to the concept and practice of racial literacy as useful in decoding the racialised world that we live in, encountering racialised violence and particularly anti-Indigenous racism. We're experiencing a very big moment in the context of our history as humans on this planet, and much of the harm being perpetrated between humans has been justified by this concept of race as a hierarchical social system which ascribes superiority to whiteness and inferiority to black and brownness. Yet despite the pervasiveness of race and white supremacy and the existence of government-funded initiatives to tackle the interpersonal and impacts of racism, like racism, it stops with me, very few people know what race is, its history or its structural impacts beyond spot the racist. And startlingly few people have the tools and language to counter the dehumanizing impacts of race, whiteness, and racism in a meaningful way. In 2 days' time, on the 31st of October, it will be only 5 decades since the passing of the Racial Discrimination Act, which came into effect on the 31st of October 1975, and that's in the living memory of many people on this call. Yet despite this too, this legislation being in place, the reality is that inequities in Australia continue to be drawn across racialised lines. And we see that in the way that our health system functions, the way that policing and incarceration functions in this country, just to name a few. To start to unpack this over the next half hour or so, I'm here to yarn with Dianne and Odette, and then depending on where we get, I'll open it up for 10 minutes of questions from the audience. So please, if you have questions, we've got someone fielding them, put it in the chat, in the Zoom chat. Enough from me. Let's introduce the stars of the show, Dianne and Odette. I met Dianne and Odette, like I mentioned, 15 years ago as a student when they were teaching racial literacy. And not only did the content and the subject, the practice, and the concept of racial literacy have a profound impact on me, but what also had a profound impact on me was watching two incredible women that have also since become my big sisters model what it meant to move through the world with a racial literacy approach. 15 years, many, many, many deep conversations, lots of highs and lows in this space. And at the time in Australia, Odette and Dianne were two of the only people actually talking about racial literacy as a concept and a practice. So to think now, 15 years later, we get to sit with you all on this call and have this conversation is really exciting to me. So Dianne Jones is a Balladong artist from Noongar country in WA. She uses photo media to reposition the representation of Aboriginal peoples and enact creative resistance to historical and contemporary colonial ideologies. Dianne's art practice reveals what is missing from pervasive Australian narratives and art history, highlighting the multifaceted nature of contemporary Indigenous identities. Born in Northam, WA, Dianne has a Master's by Research in Fine Arts from the Victorian College of Arts and has work held in many important public collections from the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra to the Museum of Contemporary Aboriginal Art in Utrecht, the Netherlands. Really, what I can tell you right now is that Dianne is iconic. Dianne is iconic. Dianne is iconic. Our other conversationalist today is Dr. Odette Kelada. Odette is a lecturer in the School of Culture and Communication at the University of Melbourne. Her writing focuses on marginalised voices, gender studies and race, and has appeared in numerous publications, including the International Journal of Intercultural Studies, Overland, and Outskirts, Feminisms on the Edge. She has Anglo and Egyptian heritage and teaches in racial literacy and creative writing. Her novel, please find it, read it, published by UWA Press, Drawing Sibylla, the Real and Imagined Lives of Australian Writing Women, won the Dorothy Hewitt Award in 2016. My pleasure to welcome Dianne and Odette. To begin, could each of you talk to where you belong? And I thought that this idea of where you belong is a little bit different to who you are, maybe in relation to place and people or community, and how you came to value the concept and practice of racial literacy. Dianne, can we start with you?
Yeah, hi Lily, thanks. I mean, that's such an interesting question, isn't it? Because I mean, I'm on my country now. I really feel like I'm on my country, and there's, I mean, you know, this to me, racial literacy is really important to my people here in Noongar country, and I can really see what survivors we are. And we've done it with very little knowledge, and knowledge has been denied to Noongar people. And when I say knowledge, I mean truth-telling. So, you know, it's been interesting to be in Perth while I'm doing part of my PhD and doing research here with the National Trust. And so I'm part of family here. You just can't help it. You know, it's just and yeah, it's kind of amazing because, you know, I've lived in Melbourne for 20 years and it's a very different place. And I'm so impressed with what is happening in Melbourne, and they are an inspiration, and it's amazing. And I can only dream of same sort of thing happening here and the rest of Australia. And I think this is where knowledge helps. This is where truth telling is so incredibly important. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
No, thanks, Dianne. And I think it's even evident in the chat how many people are calling in from Wurundjeri and Bunurong country that, you know, the conversation, especially around race or racial literacy, is pretty progressed in Naarm.
yeah,
Odette,
it's really.
Yes, hello
Odette,
everyone. Hello
what
everyone.
about you? Where do you belong and what does racial literacy mean to you?
Yeah, thank you, Lily, and just thank you for everyone for giving up some time today to all be here together. And yeah, it's very exciting to be here to be able to chat with Lilly and Dianne. So I'm coming from Wurundjeri country today. This question of where do I belong? It's like a question that has been, it's a question that has pervaded my life in the sense of, and I believe there may be people listening who relate to this, when you're between cultures, and it's not a question that I ever think there's an easy answer to. So for me, I come from migrant parents, and I just want to do a shout out to the work of Diversity Arts here, because I think having these kind of sites, these hubs for multiculturalism and people with migrant heritage is really critical, and particularly their approach of making sure to have First Nations knowledges at the foreground and be so open to learning, because that's exactly what needs to happen if you've arrived here as a migrant. So just to talk to my positionality, to give some more detail of that, my father is from Alexandria in Egypt, and my mother was born in London, but all the family were Irish. So those were the two really strong influences we had. But there was that made it, not clear to belong in Australia or to ever really feel Australian. And then, and certainly not on land that's been stolen, on land whose sovereignty has never been ceded. So when I think of your question, Lilly, I think of all the times of being asked where I'm from in this country by people. And I think about the fact that I gave up on trying to answer in any clear way that question of belonging, and that rather than trying to answer that as a imperative, more gaining a sense of belonging and from connections, from people like our friendships, like with yourself, with Dianne, with Genevieve, with people, with family, with friends, with community. Yeah.
Thanks, Odette and Dianne. And I wanted to ask that question, where do you belong? Because it's kind of inspired by a queer Latino theorist called Amy Carrillo Rowe, who talks about how quite often our identities, and particularly our racialized identities, are fixed in time and place in a way. Whereas when we're thinking about where we belong, we're also talking about what communities we're accountable to. And it shifts and changes with time. And because we're talking about race and whiteness today, which are very, over the centuries, concepts that have shifted, but also really attempted to designate people in particular places at particular times, I thought that thinking about belonging was a good way to start this conversation. Odette, I want to handball this to you. We've read a lot about racial literacy, and one of the people and thinkers who have inspired all three of us in the work that we do is the late professor at Harvard, the late professor of law at Harvard, Lani Guinier, who was an African-American and Jewish theorist, the first African-American woman to be a Harvard law professor, and also one of the first theorists to use the term racial literacy. And she said that racial literacy acknowledges the importance of individual agency, but refuses to lose sight of the institutional and environmental forces that both shape and reflect that agency. Can you talk a little bit, Odette, about what racial literacy is and how it is a concept and practice that is useful in understanding not only how racism functions interpersonally, but also systemically or structurally?
Yeah, thank you, Lilly. So sure, I'm going to quote actually from an article that we all wrote together because we had to define racial literacy. And when I knew this question, of course, would come up in this, I thought, look, let's go to the work we've done as a trio. So this is an article that Lilly, Dianne, and I wrote based actually. Lilly spoke about being a student way back when of the racial literacy course, but Lilly fast went on to become a incredibly good friend, a deep friend, and very close, and a colleague, and we worked together in this area. But as a student, I remember Lilly coming up to me in the classroom and the first question going, how do you know this even works? How do you know any of this has an effect? And I said, that's a good question. And Lilly went on to do an honours thesis and interview students of racial literacy. And this article came out of that, those interviews. Feel free, Lilly, to add anything that I might be missing from that quick summary. But the article's titled with a student quote, which is, "While I know I was raced, I didn't think much of it." And that captured so much about the way race was working in this country, because race was something that this student, who identified as a white student, didn't see race as something that impacted them, and it was only something to do with racialized groups. So racial literacy, this is from that article, is the development of literacy skills specifically designed to enable critical understandings of race and how race operates in contemporary contexts. So skills required involve learning, communicating through multiple modes, and with an awareness of power relations, influencing identity formation, social practices, and institutionalized systems. So it's not some kind of new theory to add on to other theories, to me, and that's what's powerful for me about racial literacy. It's understanding how, in fact, everything is connected. It's about connection, and it's about stories. And being able, and I always remember, Lilly, you would say in classes, how are we meant to have anti-racism conversations or activist effective conversations about race when we don't even understand where the language of race came from, and when we use these words, where the very words we have to speak their origins and what we're even talking about. How do we have productive conversations? So, you know, and saying that, we are in a country that calls what is the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is in March, calls it Harmony Day. So we're in a country that wants to sort of often remove explicitly the language of race. So just to talk for a minute then about Lani Gurnia, because she was a scholar that, when I realized that in my teaching I hadn't ever been taught race in my sort of educational, you know, curriculum, and I went searching for it, basically, because I realized that I needed some tools. And racial literacy enables an approach that continually links race as a powerful discursive construct and language with real intersectional economic, social, historical, and political impacts. And the person who brought that home to me was Professor Lani Gurnia's work. I really recommend having a look at her scholarship. Very influential, because she interrogated how, and there's a particular article online, which was the first I came across, from racial liberalism to racial literacy. She looked at how, despite historic legal change that outlawed racial segregation of schooling in the US, it did not stop the actual educational inequity and ongoing segregation in schools still persists to such a huge extent. And she argued for the need for racial literacy to understand this is more than changing a law. She describes it as a set of social competencies or practices that require listening to diverse viewpoints. Her actual, and I'm just going to end with a quote from her because she articulates things so incredibly eloquently. She says, racial literacy seeks to decode the discursive and performative systems of race. It is the process of making legible race in order to see how it adapts its syntax to mass, class, and code geography, and learning to see that race involves a set of representational practices. And I can't think of a time when being able to decode, to make legible, to make visible the very things that kind of thrive on collective ignorance is so essential.
So, Dianne, I was just saying that your art is an easily accessible of the way that racial literacy can be put into practice. And I know that this conversation is hosted by Diversity Arts Australia. You are an artist, and you have really stretched, I think, the way that Australia as a nation state has been imagined into being, and you've really challenged that. You're an incredible artist. You use photo media and other mediums to profoundly challenge racist colonial imagery and representations in creative practice. So I'm interested to hear what racial literacy looks like in practice for you, both as a Balladong woman and also an artist.
I mean, I'm so aware of when I make work, what I'm actually saying. And I think one of the things that is most important to me is that I've seen so many negative images of Aboriginal people in Australia. And to me, that has an effect on a young Aboriginal person. And I think representation is so powerful. And people say, oh, it's just social media or something. But if you're being trolled, it's so negative. Things that happened with Adam Goodes was devastating to see Australia behave in that way, and to affect a footballer, a great footballer who happens to be Aboriginal. And so if we are not talking about race, and if it's not just in your everyday life, then something like Adam Goodes becomes about, oh, they're just yobbos, or they're just bogans, or they're just not nice people. None of that is true. What is actually true is that they're using hate, but they probably don't have any race knowledge because it isn't taught in Australia. And if you are taught race knowledge, and then if it's a choice. We all have a choice. Then if you do behave in those ways, you are really aware that you're spreading hate, and so for me, it is so important that this information gets as far as it can in the world, that we understand that race is a concept. It's mind-blowing to me. And when I realized, being 10-ish years old in a country town and being told that Charles Darwin believed that Aboriginal people were on the lowest rung of the evolutionary ladder, and I'm sitting in a classroom with other Noongar kids, we have no words to combat that. We know, how can that be true? But why is she saying that to us? And why is she not teaching race, critical race studies as part of the norm of our classrooms? And so that when I got into my 30s is when I discovered with Odette racial literacy, and it blew my mind. And it blew my mind in two ways. One, it was empowering because it was like, yes, I knew we're all just humans. No one is better than anyone else because the color of their skin or their culture has made any difference. It hasn't made any difference. We're all just the same. The knowledge was incredible, but then there was the sadness that I had to live through that as a child and in schools. And at some point in the back of my mind think and try not to believe all the lies that I had been told. And also, I never really get asked what it means to be an Aboriginal person. I get told, and I get told that by so many people. And so, this is unpacking all of that. It is actually saying, this is what it is. And it's okay to be educated about this. It's not only okay, it's going to change the world. It has the potential. So yeah, racial literacy, to use it in my work, is one way that I can do this.
Dianne, I know that you actually have one of your most recent artworks handy. Do you want to bring it up on the screen for everyone to see and maybe just speak to it a little bit before I jump into the next question? Because I think that the power of your work, that your work is just such an incredible vehicle to really understand when we're talking about language and images and representation, the power of actually putting Aboriginal bodies in places where we've been excluded forever, and reclaiming those spaces, just so profound.
This work, I was invited by Abigail, who is a director of Fremantle Arts Centre, and she said, "Can you please make a work about Bathers Beach?" And so this is in Fremantle in Western Australia. And as I was researching it, I was really thinking about first contact. And as I was going down there and I was seeing so many people enjoying the beach, and also my family. So all these people in this photo are my family. And I thought, okay, I've done work previously where I've put myself in Max Dupain images to talk about not that is my work, but to talk about the lack of Indigenous faces in representation in Australia. And so I Googled and I looked in books at Aboriginal people on the beach, and I didn't find any. I'm not saying that they're not out there, but when I looked, I couldn't find them. And so I thought I'll do an AI thing. So I put Aboriginal people on the beach, and it brought up some really, really strange images. And I thought, I can't use any of that. And in fact, AI doesn't recognize Aboriginal Australian people. And so, I dragged my family down to the beach and I said, let's just do what we normally do. This is actually what we do on the beach. And I don't understand why there aren't any photos talking about that kind of representation. Now, what I do want to say is that, and I might share this link, I did get Odette to write the catalogue, and it is actually a reference to Charles Mears' painting from the 1940s, and which you'll find it really interesting because it's actually all white people yet again. And in Australia, I know Aboriginal people go on the beach because I've seen them. I've been one of them. So I just wanted to say that and talk about, even my mum loves to go down the beach, even if we have to push her wheelchair down there. So, and that's how I like to talk about my work, is that I want to see what I didn't see or what I don't see. And there's a lot.
Yeah. Thank you, Dianne. Do you mind unsharing your screen for me so I can see your faces? And Dianne, you spoke a little bit to education and its importance in the context of racial literacy, but I mean, that's even, I think, reinforced in the current moment where we're headed, not just in Australia, but globally. In 2021, actually, the Australian Senate voted in support of a motion calling on the federal government to reject critical race theory from the national curriculum. Liberal Senator Sarah Henderson, earlier this year as the Shadow Minister for Education, has also made clear that the opposition party's position is that critical race theory has no place on the Australian curriculum. And then meanwhile, in the United States, 27 states have banned or are in the process of banning critical race education in the classroom. Odette, I might come to you. Why do you think schools are such contested sites when it comes to promoting a critical race or racial literacy perspective?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lily. Look, there's such an interesting story to how this came to be a thing and who started and how it started, which is probably more complex than we can go into here. But just to remember also that Pauline Hanson also tried to pass an It's Okay to Be White bill, which was only narrowly defeated in the Australian Senate as well. So these conversations about critical race are going very much in tandem with whiteness and what we're seeing more manifesting as the rise of white supremacy and so on. So there is a lot happening in this space. And Dianne and I were writing about schools for a chapter and I just want to mention this book because, again, if those people are looking for resources, this is a great book put out by Genevieve Greaves, edited by Genevieve Greaves and Amy Spears, called Art and Memorialization. And we were looking at, I just want to read a bit of it. It says, "Critical race theory is a this idea of education, schools, in relation to how imperialism requires internal as well as external domination. And we were looking at what was happening with the statue of Winston Churchill. The government in the UK completely entombed his statue in a futuristic looking steel box to protect it from activists. And the irony of that for someone, you know, there are many quotes from Churchill, but one of them was, the empires of the future are the empires of the mind. So the fight over schools, the stakes are high. Stakes are about the future, more than the past, perhaps. So, you know, this idea of the future generations and schools being where that is being predominantly able to be created or at least strongly influenced. So, yeah, absolutely. The education system's prime territory through shaping these sort of empires of the mind, you could say. And we can see that in the absence even of public sites that actually tell truths about colonisation and First Peoples sovereignty, alongside pedagogy that fails to adequately educate. I don't think a lot necessarily has changed from my experience of students who walk into a classroom now, how many of them still, you know, do not know that race, that there is no biological factual underpinning to race. It is not biologically real. It is an invention, and there is a story to its invention. And I think, you know, asking why, what is so with this prevention of teaching about race, what is it trying to stop? What is there in the story that there is a biological difference between people that is entrenching ideas of racial hierarchy? So basically, you know, there's a toxic ignorance that's been inherited across generations, and there's a fight to continue that and to continue transmitting that. And schools are clearly right at the front lines of these battles. And you know, that's why I think there's clearly very good reasons the story of race is such a dangerous story, and also why so many people fight to protect it.
Thank you, Odette. We're coming up to 1:45, and I want to open up for questions. But I have one kind of wrap-up question for you both before we move to that, which it's a big question, but I'm gonna ask you to answer it kind of quickly so we can move to audience questions. But given this current moment, and when I say this current moment, I mean post a negative referendum result, where 66% or 2/3 of Australian people voted against recognising a First Nations voice to Parliament. And then after witnessing for 2 years a live stream genocide being committed by Israel against the people of Palestine and Gaza, which is ongoing in the West Bank, what is the significance of racial literacy in countering the ongoing dehumanisation of Black and Brown people? Like, what is the significance of this? Dianne, I might start with you.
Oh, well, it's about control, isn't it? It's about, but I was so disappointed because I thought we're 2025 or it's 2024. You don't want to know that this is who Australia, and that was glaringly obvious. This is the choice they made. And since then, it's amazing that it never, ever comes up. So then it becomes about the silence. And the silence is as dangerous as the word no, because it does the same thing.
Yeah.
And when you're doing attempted genocide on such a scale, it doesn't just happen in that moment. This is affecting children's. People have to recover and heal, and nobody will recognize, no one recognizes on a grander scale how devastating that is. I know for a fact that I have seen people here in WA who are still suffering effects of colonization, who still get treated a certain way because their skin is darker and obvious to the visual eye. And I'm gobsmacked that. So, and I won't go on about it, but what I will say is just because that's happened, it doesn't have to continue happening. Because that happened last year or the year before, let's change it next year. Let's change it next month. We don't have to be complicit. We don't have to be silent. We really don't. So if I don't agree with it, I'm happy to keep talking about it. And I'm happy if Australia did another referendum and if they do one every year until we actually get it right.
Mm.
So, yeah, that's what I
Dianne,
think.
thank you. Odette, the role of racial literacy in countering dehumanisation.
This is such a huge question, and in the time that we've got, that my approach is just going to be to take one example, if that's okay, but with total acknowledgement of how big this is and how huge what has been happening and the deep effects on our how do we even, no words, but there it's racial literacy makes me revisit what I think I know and constantly question and flip it around and keep on reading for what is left unread and what is left out. And that happened to me not long ago with a quote that I had heard many, many times, which was an Audre Lorde quote that is often used when talking about power and what is needed in the face of relentless oppression. And that quote is, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." But there is more to that quote that is often left unsaid, and it actually transforms the whole meaning of that quote. Lorde goes on to say, "And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support." Until we understand how and why there's a master's house and the tools used to isolate and dehumanize in the current moment, we might just continue to define that quote in the truncated form and that house as the source. So if we want to change definitions, create genuine solidarities and our own supports, that's where education such as racial literacy might help. And by the way, I'm not saying racial literacy, I've never said this is an answer. What it is something to be constantly engaged with intersectionally to inform across the complexities of lived experiences and marginalizations. But the approach of it is to get to the roots of foundations and have heart-connected knowledges where we look again at what we've been taught, like those lines, like the master's house. Why is that line that it's only threatening to those for whom the master's house is the only source of support left out? How do we read deeply, diversify and nurture our sources and collective powers? And just, I know we don't have much time, but I find obviously looking to creative artists and writers is just so critical and such a source of inspiration, such as obviously Dianne. And I was at a book launch recently for the wonderful Melbourne writer Natalie Dyer, and she offered a quote by the brilliant writer Alexis Wright, who emphasizes how much we need creatives and storytellers to create new worlds now more than ever. So I just want to, if I can, just share this quote because it absolutely captures what, in response to your question. So Wright says, "Stories have been blown off course, marooned, caught in nets. The storytellers will need to fly higher, be braver, to capture more of the world and tell stories more imaginatively, more forcibly and powerfully enough to subvert the censoring narratives of inhumanity." And I'd argue that race is one of these stories, a dangerous story that's been caught in the nets. And racial literacy is about untangling and therefore helping liberate our imaginations, our voices, our bodies, minds, and spirits.
Thank you, Odette. That was really beautiful. And I agree, our storytellers are also our truth tellers. And when we're thinking about the people who hold space and can really facilitate these learnings, it is artists and it is storytellers. For me, I think racial literacy, one of the real important aspects of it is that once you begin to understand race as a concept that has real life world implications, but also as a social construct, it also then forces you to see other things like, in the same way, and whether it be gender. For me, I remember when I first started learning about racial literacy and implementing it into my practice as an educator, at the time I had a student email me and say, "Can I come and talk to you about accessibility to the lecture theatre?" And I said, "Yeah, of course, come visit me."
and she arrived and she was in a wheelchair. And I realized in that moment, because I had been really actively trying to develop a racial literacy approach, that I actually didn't have a literacy around disability. And I was able to say that to her. I don't hold a shared language with you to be able to have a conversation with you about accessibility and disability in a safe way. So do you want me to do some reading and then I can give you a call? And just in me saying that, in naming that I had a lack of shared language with her, meant that she sat in my office for an hour and a half and we yarned up about how I could make sure that my classroom was a safe space for her. So I think when you embark actively on trying to develop a racial literacy approach, what you're really doing is you're just growing a literacy, a critical literacy, to be able to ensure that the spaces that you hold or the organization that you're a part of, or, you know, your family members are safe in their full humanity and whatever it is that they bring. And so I want to come to a question that's been asked by Emma. Thank you. And she says, can you talk to Dianne's beautiful statement that racial literacy can change the world, i.e., how it illuminates other struggles for justice? Could you both kind of comment about that? And then I think it's kind of time to wrap up. Dianne, you first.
Because we only know what we've been taught. We're human. And so if you are actually taught why there is one dominant race treating another race, I can only speak for personal experience mostly, which is to be a Noongar, where I'm a small percentage, and I'm affected every day. And I also know that I do the work to help educate people who haven't been taught this at school. And so what if this was taught at school? And what if I don't have to carry that burden of, before I get to work with somebody or to make work and then have to explain? I mean, this is how, I won't go on for too long because I know we haven't got much time, but this is how it actually started. When I started making artworks, I realized nobody could actually understand what I was trying to say. So then I had to talk about what those artworks meant and where they came from. And so then it became part of a teaching practice. But if we were taught racial literacy in school, you could look at that and understand exactly. You can watch a movie on TV and understand what is happening with gender, intersectionality, race. You could, everything. It doesn't stop your enjoyment of the movie, though it does actually make you think, oh, okay, this is really interesting. It adds another layer. I think, so to answer the question, how could it change the world? I know this is really optimistic, but it means that once you know this knowledge, it's your conscience that you deal with. And I think most humans are good people, and it could make a better world. And that's what I mean by change the world.
Thanks, Dianne. And it's so true, because if actually something like racial literacy was embedded in curriculum, then we wouldn't have a film or TV industry where inequities, existed to the point where our TV screens only reflected back the hegemony of whiteness, So I think it is really around how do we collectively as a society build that shared language. And because we're humans, language so intimately relates to practice. It's how we build and make meaning of our life worlds and the structures and societies that we exist in. Odette, do you have any last comment about that?
It's what we do in a racial literacy workshop is look at how, when the story of race was invented, we're in a particular historical time period. And we also see the use of a word like the word white, which wasn't always applied to humans and wasn't always around. And what we see, it was first applied to women. So gender is part of this story, and it was first applied in a way that really shaped class and access to capital. And it's a story that intersects with colonization, and it intersects with slavery. All of these stories are deeply complex, and incredibly entangled. And it's actually fascinating, but we don't have time. Obviously, I don't have time to do that, to go into that here. I just want to point to the fact that the reason why I think it can be so intersectionally connected is none of these kind of things that have become grouped on the axis of power and inequity exist alone. They are in tandem and are often used in a relational way. And when we understand that and start to deconstruct that gives us these deeper insights, not just into race, but by necessity into gender, by necessity into class, by necessity into all the ways that people are kept down. Yeah.
Thank you, Odette. That brings us to the end of this conversation, which I hope you'll continue in your workplace, in your practice, around your kitchen table, but really importantly, I hope that you, in kind of starting to develop, if you haven't already, this language around race, you can also understand how you can use this as a tool to break down some of the oppressive racialized hierarchies and systems that continue to structure the way that we live and exist in the settler colonial context of Australia. Again, thank you. Thank you to Diversity Arts and the Imagine case study partners, Creative New South Wales, Creative Australia and the British Council for supporting this conversation to happen today. Thank you to our incredible Auslan interpreters, Beck and Yasmin. Please visit Shifting Ground's website for resources and news around other events or learning opportunities, particularly if you're a part of an organisation who might have an appetite to do better in your work and engagement with First Nations people for the benefit of all people. We have a Shifting Ground Social Enterprise Learning Circle coming up. The information is on our website, and likewise updates on different workshops and things that we'll be presenting. Diversity Arts has an incredible creative cultural diversity network on the road, which will be in Canberra from November the 27th to 28th. A link has been put into the chat box now. And you can also access the Imagine case studies via the Diversity Arts Australia website. Another link is going to be been put into the chat box just for you to share feedback on today's session. So I really encourage you to please jump on and provide feedback. It enables us to do better next time. Thank you for your time. Much love. Go safely. And we hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.